And thank you very much once again, everyone, for joining this meeting. So briefly, maybe as we are proceeding, just to agree with Stella, from the Ministry of Gender, first of all, to indicate that the Ministry of Gender is the lead agency for the national gender machinery. Now, our role as the lead national gender machinery is that we promote issues of gender equality and women's empowerment to make sure that gender is not just a cross-cutting issue, but that it is an integral part of our planning, in the plans, in the policies, and the different programs that not just government departments are coming up, but all of us as stakeholders. So we make sure that our aim is to make sure that the women, boys, girls, men, everyone, all gender groups are equal participants and beneficiaries of the different national development processes. So maybe quickly before we move on to the operations of the Strand, which is our next item on the agenda, just to state that from the perspective of the ministry, what is it that we do when we talk about gender programming? So the Ministry of Gender, from the Department of Gender Affairs, we have 4 key programs in which we look at the integration of gender. So first of all, we talk about issues of gender mainstreaming, that gender must be an integral part of the programs, policies, and other interventions that we're coming up with. That entails that before coming up with any activity, we have to make sure that the experience of different gender groups form part and parcel of whatever interventions that we are coming up with. The voices, especially of the marginalized, should not be faint, but they should be integrated and form part of the strategies. So issues of gender analysis, we encourage different departments, agencies, and directorates to come up we help in doing gender analysis, coming up with gender policies, and making sure that we do the gender audits, we do issues of gender responsive budgeting and all that to make sure that we track how much of the resources that are coming into the country or from the government budget, how much of these resources are going to programs that are benefiting women, men, boys, and girls. So it is quite huge. And I believe as a sector, this is also one of the key things that we must be doing in tracking progress in terms of the funding that we are receiving, the resources that are coming into Malawi, for example, from the Scottish government, how much of those resources, if we are using to implement programs and the projects, how much of those resources are trickling down to the different gender groups. So that entails gender analysis, conducting a thorough gender So apart from issues of gender mainstreaming proper, there are also issues of eliminating gender-based violence. So this is also huge, as we are all aware that gender-based violence is one of the key things that would affect our development as a country. If we talk about achieving the Agenda 2063, we cannot achieve if we have various groups that are at the risk of violence. For example, the sexual violence, which is on the increase in Malawi, economic violence, the different forms of violence that would be affecting both men, women, and boys and girls. Now, we need to come up with different mechanisms that are responding to the problem at hand, because GBV, even amidst COVID, has been one of the key outcomes of the pandemic, with the lockdowns and other measures that have been put in place. Of course, as a country, we do not have the lockdowns. So we have issues of gender, responding and addressing gender-based violence, issues of promoting women's economic empowerment, but also lastly, promoting women's participation in decision-making structures. So we talk about how many women are in positions of decision-making in public and in public institutions, but also in private sector, in parliament, at the district council level, in the various committees that we establish in the communities, because we know it is always said that there's nothing for us without us, and we have to make sure that women, girls, and other vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities, are included and taking an active role in deciding determining how interventions should respond to their unique and peculiar needs. So just in brief, I thought it was important to outline what is it that we do as Ministry of Gender, which we also expect that as we are coming up with different policies, programs, these must feed into what the government is doing. So there are different policies that govern the work that we do. For example, the National Gender Policy, there are a lot of strategies that we are using. For example, the National Plan of Action to Combat Gender-Based Violence. There's a National Plan of Action on Economic Empowerment of Women. There's a National Plan of Action on Political Empowerment of Women. So there are so many policies that govern gender issues, but not to forget that as we're talking about Malawi Agenda 2063, then this is our overarching goal. So I do not want, I'm deliberately not speaking of how all these programs are feeding into the Agenda 2063, because NPC is here and is going to take us through that. But just to state that what we expect as well is that as we're developing our programs, plans, and policies, we expect that they respond as well to this policy framework that we have as the gender sector. So not only are we looking at us or just this us as a gender strand, but our strand is also very critical in looking at the core gender issues in the other strands. For example, in WASH, because, there are a lot of gender issues related to WASH. There are a lot of gender issues in the education sector, in the health sector. So our strand is really central in making sure that in all the other strands, gender issues are not faint, but that they are clearly outlined, and that all the gender groups are equal beneficiaries and equal participants in the various programs and interventions that were coming up through the other strands. So I thought it was important to highlight that the importance of this strand, that it cannot be overemphasized. So as we are talking about our meeting today, the aim is to achieve socioeconomic development through partnerships. So we'll move on to agenda item number 2, operations of the strand. Unless maybe if there's a comment on what I shared about what the Ministry of Gender does, and also what as a strand, the gender strand, how cross-cutting our role is and how relevant we are supposed to be, even in the other strand, which means that from time to time, our participation in the other strands is also very important. So maybe could there be any comment before we proceed to the other to the next agenda item on operations of the strand?
I see Paul raised the hand.
Yes, please. I cannot see raised. So if you raise the hand, please, you can speak. Thank you.
I just wanted to, I think, comment on one aspect that you raised, Chair, regarding gender issues in what other stakeholders are doing. I think we're taking a good step that gender is not like an appendage to what we are doing in terms of national development, but it is something that is an integral part of every single intervention that we are implementing in various sectors. And I must commend that the Ministry of Gender over the past half a decade or so has been working very much in terms of mainstreaming gender issues in all of the various important sectors. But now I think it is becoming part of life, and gender is for everyone, and every planning that we're doing, implementation and monitoring and evaluation has to have gender lens, so that this is well taken care of. Because in my opinion, and indeed in the development planning process, of taking gender not as a one institution issue, but for everyone. So I thought I should just add weight to that point that gender is extremely important, that it has to feature in every or now planning processes at all levels, at national, subnational, but also at community levels. I thought that is important. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sipho, for that emphasis. Indeed, we cannot overemphasize. Some time back, World Bank indicated that gender does not just make sense, but it makes sense, meaning that adopting gender responsive programming has a lot of benefits to the in terms of achieving whatever development objectives and goals that we have. Otherwise, having gender blind policies is very costly to many countries. And that's why maybe we are at this point, because looking at where we are coming from, this is one of the reasons why, for example, we failed as a country to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, mainly because some of the gender issues were not adequately integrated or addressed. So thank you so much for raising and for emphasizing on that. I do not think that we have any other hand, because it was just an introduction. Unless if you have, you can also put it in the chat box. Now, the next item on the agenda was to do with the operations of the Strand. Maybe just to indicate that as a Strand, we wanted to agree how best should we be working, because I should, insofar as I remember, it's been a while since we met, and I think at times we have been meeting as the Strands together, but maybe having properly structured meetings as a Strand has not been happening very often. We understand because of the current health situation that we have could be one of the attributing factors. So we wanted, first of all, to have some concrete and substantive action points in terms of how should we be operating. As we said, our role is not just to come here to discuss, to meet together to discuss the gender issues, but we would also want to see how is our role relevant in the other strands, but also even going beyond the strands, how do we involve each other? For example, how at certain points in time, how do we get to meet or to see what is happening on the ground in terms of implementation of the programs, so that when we come together to meet like a Strand, we are able to appreciate the progress that we are making, the impact that the different interventions are having on the ground. So just to say that as we are contributing on this agenda item, first of all, is to really look at what kind of a direction do we want to take as a Strand to make sure that our role is relevant and that we are able to meet frequently, and that our meetings are not just to get reports, but also to appreciate the kind of work that we are doing, but also what's the impact and how we can strengthen our overall coordination as stakeholders. So I should put it that way and get your comments in terms of how best you'd want our functionality to be as a Strand.